Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Sadi Zayin. New Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Bishel mitechilat haregel, yevashel bo kol haregel. Rabbi Tarfon says that if you cook a korban in a pot at the beginning of a festival, let's say the beginning of Sukkot or the beginning of Pesach, you do not need to do midika and shitifa on that day or even the next day, but rather you can continue using that pot for the entire length of the holiday. Let's pick Pesach for all 7 days, and then you do midika and shitifa at the end of the holiday, which is kind of surprising, because when you read the pasuk, it sounded like after you do it, each time you have to do midika and shitifa. No, Rabbi Tarfon says, you can continue using it the whole time. Gemara will explain his source and reason. Chachamim omrim ad zeman achilat midika u'shtifa, and Chachamim disagree, and they say you have to do midika and shtifa. You don't have to do it immediately. You cooked a korban hatat in the morning at 10 a.m. and then you don't have to do midika and shtifa immediately. You can leave the pot. However, you have until the end of the time of eating. Now, if it's like a korban chatat, kodesh kodashim, you have a day and a night to eat the meat that's cooked in it as a kohen. And so therefore, you should do midika and shtifa before the end of the night, before the time is up for the eating of it. Which makes sense, because at that, while it's edible, it's kosher. So now the pot is still a kosher pot. Once you can no longer eat it, well, the next morning it becomes notar. And after it's notar, now the absorption in the pot is also going to be notar. So it makes sense you have to get rid of it beforehand, which means we really have to wonder about Rabbi Tarfon. Medika k'medika takos, ushtifa k'shtifa takos, medika ushtifa besonen. What is, we've been talking about this a lot, but we never really defined it. What is medika? Medika is the way that you scour the inside of a cup. Shtifa is the way that you would rinse the outside of a cup. When you have a cup and you put wine or something inside the cup, that is going to get sticky, leave a residue. So then you have to really rub it with something. You have to scour it. Whereas the outside of the cup, the wine, maybe it just splatters a little, but you're touching it, but you're not getting a lot of dirt on the outside, so it doesn't require scouring with a sponge, but rather just rinsing. And both midika and shtifa is with cold water. So that's a chidush. The point is, even though you're using this for hot, you're cooking something in it. And usually we say if you cook some non-kosher in something or meat, to get it out, you have to boil it. You have to use hot to get it out. But midika and shtifa, you see here, is a different process altogether. This is a special law for korbanot. They have to do this midika and shtifa. And the Gemara will explain further. Hashapud v'askala magilan bechamin. If you use a spit or a metal grill, and you cook a korban on the spit or metal grill, then you do have to do hagala in hot water. All right. My ta'amad Rabbi Tarfon. Let's explain Rabbi Tarfon, who says you could use it the entire korban, the entire Pesach, and then every day you don't have to do medika and shtifa from day to day, only at the end of the holiday. Damar kira ufanita baboker v'halachta lohalecha hakatub asau lechulan boker echad. There is in fact a pasuk in Sefer Devarim that says, you will roast the korban Pesach and eat it where Hashem shall choose, and you shall turn in the morning and then go to your tents. Now, the main point of the pasuk is that wherever you are when you're eating korban Pesach, you have to stay there. You have to make an overnight, right? You're going over to your in-laws, you got to stay there the whole night, and you don't go back home until the next day. Now, what does that mean? You don't go home till the next day. This still is Yom Tov. And so you're going to travel. So when are you exactly going home? And how about the rest of the holiday? Are you not going to leave Jerusalem on the first day? You're not going to stay for the whole holiday. So what does this mean? Uvanita baboker. So the Midrash understands that the boker is not the 15th of Nisan, the next day after the Korban, the day after the night when you eat the Korban. That's not the day that you go home. Rather, ufanita baboker means you go after the holiday is over. Then in the morning, the holiday is complete. After the 7th day, then you go home. Now, what does that mean if you're calling that the morning? It means that the pasuk is treating the entire, all 7 days of the holiday as if it's one day. So that you're in Yerushalayim for the entire holiday, that's one day, and then the next day in the morning. So since the pasuk treats all 7 days as one day, so you're right. And on a regular day, that's not a holiday, just any chol. If you cook a korban in the morning, you have to do medikat shetifah by the next day before it becomes notar. That would be true for a regular non-holiday. But a holiday, all 7 days are like one day. And therefore, you can continue using it all the days of the holiday and then do medikah all the way at the end. Matkif la Rav Achdeboy bar Ameh. V'chi en pigul baregel, v'en notar baregel. Achdeboy bar Ameh challenges this derivation, because if you take this literally, seriously, that all 7 days are like one day, well then, are you going to tell me that there's no prohibition of pigul or of notar on the holiday? Let's start with notar. Notar means you have a korban hatat and you do it on the first day of the holiday. You can eat it that day and that night, but you can't eat it the second day. Now you're telling me all 7 days are like one. So does that mean that this korban hatat, or I can eat even the next day and 2 days later, 3 days later, all the way every day of the holiday? That can't be. And pigul is when I have in mind, when I'm doing shechita, I have in mind that I'm going to consume it in 3 days from now. You're telling me that that's allowed on Pesach, that I have in mind 3 days from now, because all 7 days are like one day, and there's no prohibition of pigul? Would you think Rabbi Tarfon would agree to that? And if you say, yes, indeed, that's what Rabbi Tarfon says. Rabbi Natan explicitly explained to us that Rabbi Tarfon only said that all the days of the holiday are considered one for the law of scouring and rinsing the pots, but not for any other law. Pigul and notar are going to work just the same, and you can only eat it, you have to eat it that day, and the next day it will be notar. And if you have in mind to eat it the next day, it will be pigul. Now, if you're going to learn it from a pasuk that says all 7 days are treated as one, well, then you have to apply it to all the laws, and we don't apply it to all the laws, therefore, that is not Rabbi Tarfon's derivation. Ela ke de Rav Nachman amar Rabba bar Avu. De amar Rav Nachman amar Rabba bar Avu. Kol yom beyom nahaseh gi'ul lachavero. Rather, the answer is what Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba bar Avu, that every day that it's used is a purging for the previous day. In other words, let's say day 1 of Pesach, we take I cook a korban hatat in that pot in the morning, and then later in the afternoon I use the same pot to cook a shilamim. Well, that shilamim, the juices and that meat of the shilamim cooking in that pot will remove the taste of the hatat that I did in the morning, because it's boiling in it. So now there's no more taste of korban hatat. I could kosher things with water, but you can kosher things with another food. So now there's no chatat already anymore. So now what's absorbed in the pot? Shalamim. Yeah, but shalamim is okay for 2 days. So the next day, I can still use the pot. And so on the next day, I could cook whatever korbanot I want in it, as long as the last korban I cook on the day is a shilamim or any kodashim kalim that can be eaten for 2 days, then I can still use it on the next day. And that's why you can use it from one day to another, because you're never going to have a problem of it becoming notar, since I'm going to kosher it with another korban on that day that will last until the next day. And that's the reasoning for Rabbi Tarfon. Chachamim omrim ad zeman achila. Chachamim, however, disagree, and they say, no, you have to do the medika and shetifah before the next morning, while you can still eat it. For a kodesh kodashim, it would have to be that day or that night. For kodashim kalim, you can do it also the next day. Mai ka'amar. What are they saying? What does this mean? Amar Rav Nachman amar Rabba bar Avu mamtin la ad zeman achila v'adad abid la medika u'shtifa. Exactly as we just said, that you wait until the last time that you can eat it, and you do that at that point the scouring and the rinsing, presumably a little bit before the time is up. Minahane mileh, what's the source? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Abba Yoseh ben Abba. Ketib umorak v'shutaf. V'uchtiv kol zachar b'kohanim yochal. Hakesad mamtin la'ad zeman achila v'adarabid la merika ushtifaha. The source is because the pasuk mentions these laws back to back. It says, you shall scour it and rinse in water. And then the next pasuk it says, every male among the kohanim shall eat it. So you see that the law of scouring and the laws of eating are juxtaposed to tell you that you should do them at the set. You should scour it. You don't have to scour it as long as you can eat it. Once you can't eat it, then you should make sure that you did merika and shetifa. Merika ke merika takos, shetifa ke shetifa takos. The end of the Mishnah tells us that it's done in cold water. The only difference is that merika is you're scouring and rubbing things, and shetifa is you're just rinsing it. But both are in cold. Tenor banan. Merika ushtifa besonen divrei bi. Hachamim omrim merika bechamin ushtifa besonen. Now we learn it's machloket. We made reference to this machloket on the previous daf. And here the Baraita teaches that merika and shetifa are both with cold, according to the Biuda Nasi. Hachamim say no. Merika is with hot water, and shetifa is with cold water. Maitama de Rabbanan. What's the source for the rabbis saying use hot water? Midi de it should be the same as koshering a pot that was used, that you got from a non-Jew. It was used for non-kosher, and now you want to kosher it. So you see that Rabbanan are in fact overlapping the laws of koshering pots that we still do today with the law of merika and shetifa that is special for korbanot. And so there is an overlap. And just like to kosher a pot, you're going to need hot water. So too, the merika part, the merika step, is with hot water. Ve'Rebi amar la chagala la kamina ki kamina limrika ushtifa debatar hagala. And Rebi says, no, I'm not talking about purging. That is a separate halacha altogether. You're right. If it's non-kosher, you're going to have to do hagala. But I'm not talking about that law of koshering it. I'm talking about merika and shetifa that you do after hagala. In other words, according to the Biuda Nasi, now we understand this a lot better. That if you cook a korban chatat in a pot, now actually you have to do two things. You have to do this special law of merika and shetifa, and you also have to kosher the pot, because when you use it the next time, there's going to be notar in it. If you use it the next day, and you can't, that's not kosher food. So you have to do both. So here's what, according to the Biuda Nasi, first you do hag'ala to get the taste of that korban in it, so that it will not remain and you won't be eating taste of notar the next time that you use it. Of course you do hag'ala. In addition to that, you also do merika and shetifa. That's the special independent law that comes to korbanot that you cook in a pot. You do this merika and shetifa. V'Rabbanan, im ken nichtob kera o morak o shutaf. Mai umorak v'shutaf shema'mina merika bechamin ushtifa besonen. Now the rabbis challenge the Biuda Nasi and says, if both steps are in cold, well then use the same word twice, because if it's cold, it's cold. So say morak, and then I know they're both the same. Or say shutaf. Why is it using a different verb, morak, and then shutaf? Does it mean that these are fundamentally different actions? And therefore, one of them, the first one must be hot, and the second one must be cold. And so according to Rabbanan, you can do the hot purging, and that would, I guess, kosher it also. So you're koshering it, and also you're doing the sonen, and that would be the shetifa. And so for korban, you do both of these, and that would kosher it as well. And that would explain why there's two different verbs. V'Rebi iketiv umorak havamina terezimne morak o terezimne shutaf lekach ketib umorak v'shutaf lomalach merika kemerika takos shetifa keshtifa takos. Rebi Yudah Nasi will answer the Rabbanan and said, no, if it said morak, I would say you scour it 2 times. If it said shutaf, I would say you rinse it 2 times. But neither of those are true. You have to do 2 different actions. They're both in cold, but they are still different verbs and different actions. The merika is what you do to the inside of a cup, where you scour it and you rub it with a sponge. And the shetifa is like you would rinse the outside of a cup. So you do those 2 things. And you also do hagala, and then these 2 types of rinsing in cold. Whereas Rabbanan say, no, they're all one. They're all the same thing together. And now you can understand why Rambam gives a psak halacha that till today, when we're koshering pots and pans, you should put it in boiling water and then in cold. Wait a second, I thought that's the law for korbanot. But you see, according to Rabbanan, they actually combine the two together and say what you do for korbanot is you put it in hot and then you put it in cold, and that will kosher it as well. And so Rabbanan are equating the laws of Medikan Shetifah you do for korbanot. Yes, you have to do that for korbanot. You also do that for Hag'alah, if you want to change something from meat to milk, or for Pesach, or if something is not kosher, then you would also follow that process. And that's why Rambam says that you do put it into cold after you boil it in hot. Next Mishnah, Bishel bo kodashim vecholin. או קודשי קודשים וקודשים קלים. אם יש בהן בנותן טעם, הרי קלים נאכלים כחמורין שבהן, ואינן טעונין מריקה ושטיפה, ואינם פוסלים במגע. If someone cooked in the same pot kodashim and cholin, a sacrifice and regular non-sacrificial food, they got mixed up and cooked in the same pot, what is the status of the food and the pot? Or second case, you cooked kodshe kodashim, a korban or hatat, together with kodashim kalim, like a shilamim. You cooked it together. Now, what do? What status does it have? It depends. If the kodesh in the first case, or the kodshe kodashim in the second case, have enough to give taste to the entire mixture, then you have to be stringent. And then, hareh kalim, the thing that is less stringent, the cholin or the kodashim kalim, has to be eaten according to the stringencies of the more strict item. So, if you have kodashim, it could be kodashim kalim. You have shilamim with cholin mixed together, well then the entirety has to be eaten like shilamim, meaning you have 2 days to eat it, and you have to eat it in Yerushalayim, and tahara, and all the laws that would be for the kodashim at whatever level it is. And if it's kodshe kodashim mixed with kodashim kalim, then you have to eat it in 1 day, and only kohanim, and only in the temple courtyard, and all the restrictions that it would have as kodshe kodashim. However, if there will be less than the taste, there was just a small amount of kodshe kodashim, then you can follow the rest of it, the majority of it, which is if it's kodashim kalim, then you can eat the whole thing as kodashim kalim, because the kodshe kodashim has no taste, not enough to give taste in it. And also if it's kodashim and cholin, and there's no taste of the kodashim, then you can eat the whole thing like cholin. And then it says, and presumably it sounds like it's going on the previous thing, that if there is no ten ta'am, then you don't need to do mirika shtifa, which is weird, because if the kodashim give taste, then shouldn't you have to do mirika shtifa? Just like you eat the whole thing according to the kodashim, so shouldn't you have to do mirika shtifa like the kodashim? The Gemara is going to ask about that. And then furthermore, it says it does not make something else pasul if it touches it. There's a halacha that we learned from this pasuk, kol ashiriga bibsara yikdash. If you have a sacrificial food and it touches something else, then the thing that it touches, yikdash, becomes holy, as if holiness is contagious. We'll see exactly what that means. It's going to get the stringencies of the original item, will pass on to the item also. However, not the whole item, but rather just the place that it touches, as we learned in the next line, rakik shenaga berakik v'chaticha b'chaticha, lo kol harikikin v'lo kol hachatichot asurin, eno asur ela b'makom shebala. If a korban mincha that's a wafer touches another korban mincha that's a wafer, and one is valid and one's invalid wafer, so it's no good, touches the other one, is going to transfer the invalid status to the one that's valid. And also, if an invalid piece of sacrificial meat touches another piece of sacrificial meat that is valid, then it's going to transfer its prohibition. However, not the entire wafer and not the entire piece of sacrificial meat will become prohibited from the invalid one, but rather only the spot where it touches and the amount that it gets absorbed. So how much will it absorb into it? So a slice of it you have to cut off as prohibited, the same status as the invalid one, but the rest of it remains valid. My kamad. Now we ask about the resha. If you said that there's enough taste and then you have to eat the whole mixture according to the stringency, well, that means that there is kodesh in it, or kodesh kodashim in the second case, in which case you should have to do mirika and shetifa. So how do we understand this Mishnah? And the answer is we're missing some words. Im yesh bahen benoten tam hareh kalin nechelin kahamurin utunin mirika ushtifa uposlin bemaga. En bahen benoten tam en aklin nechelin kahamurin ve'en tonin mirika ushtifa ve'en poslin bemaga. First it says if there is enough to give taste, then the less stringent part of the mixture has to be in according to the standards of the more stringent part of the mixture. And you would need to do scouring and rinsing, and if some of that touched something else, it would make the something else invalid by contact. And then if the next case is if there's not enough in the kodesh or kodesh kodashim part to give taste, then the lenient part of it does not have to be in according to the stringent part that got into the mixture, but rather it remains the lenient part, the lenient laws, and it will not require midika shetifa, and it will not make something else pasul by touching it. Now you can add in the words. You don't really even have to add into the words. You could just imply it. That the first part is and im yesh bahen it noten tam harakim nechen chamurin shebahen, and then implied is. And if not, then enan teonin. But if yes, there is. But you have to kind of insert that as an explanation. Nihi de kodesh kodashim laba'u kodashim kalim nib'eh. Now we ask about this. What do you mean that if there's no noten ta'am, then you don't have to do mirika ushtifa? Well, fine, it doesn't need mirika ushtifa as kodesh kodashim, but it's still required as kodashim kalim. In other words, there's two cases here. One is kodashim with cholin. Okay, if there's only a little bit of kodashim without taste, then you just cooked cholin. Well, if it's cholin, you don't need to do mirika ushtifa. That I understand. But the second case said kodesh kodashim mixed with kodashim kalim. Now, even if there's no taste of kodesh kodashim, still, even if it was just kodashim kalim, you would have to do mirika or shetifa. That is the opinion of chachamim that we saw in the previous Mishnah. So why are you saying that you don't have to? If there's no taste, you don't have to. You should still have to do mirika shetifa for the kodashim kalim. Amar Abaye, mai en teonin de ka'amar kodesh kodashim ava kodashim kalim teonin. Abaye says yes, indeed. When it says you don't need to do mirika shetifa, that's talking about for the kodesh kodashim. For that, you don't have to do mirika shetifa. But if there's kodashim kalim in it, then you would have to. So in the case of kodesh with cholin, then you wouldn't have to do it at all. That's what the really en teonin is going in the case where there's chulin in it. So then some kodesh, even it's kodesh kodashim or kodesh, whatever, with chulin, and you don't taste any of the sacrificial food, so then you don't have to do it at all. But you're right, indeed, if it was kodesh kodashim with kodashim kalim, then you would need to still do mirika shetifa for the kodashim kalim, which is the majority. Rava Amar, ha maneh Rabbi Shimon hi damar kodashim kalim and teonin mirika shetifa. Rava disagrees with Abaye and says, no, the author of this Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, and he says that you don't have to do mirika shetifa for kodashim kalim. Therefore, if it got mixed up, kodesh kodashim and kodashim kalim, and there's no taste of the kodesh kodashim, then you don't have to do mirika and shetifa at all. Bishlama Rava, hainu de katane o kodesh kodashim v'kodashim kalim, ela labaye tartela mali. We understand according to Rava why the Mishnah mentioned both cases. It told us the case of kodashim and cholin, that we know that we get to learn the basic law, and it wanted to teach me also the law of kodesh kodashim and kodashim kalim in order to teach me that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, that if you have kodesh kodashim and kodashim kalim and there's no taste of kodesh kodashim, then you don't have to do mirika and shetifa because it's only kodesh kodashim kalim. And so we learn from that second case in the Mishnah that we follow Rabbi Shimon. But according to Abaye, the whole thing is according to Chachamim, and therefore you only need one of these two cases to teach me the basic law that If you have a mixture, then you follow, if there's taste, then you follow the stringency of the taste. But if there's no taste from the stringent thing, then you don't. Then you can just follow the lenient thing. I can learn that from either of these two cases independently, and then figure out the other one, right? And the answer is no. Siriche, I do need both of them. Di tana kodashim veholin. Hava mina holin hu de batele kodashim. De la minayu. Aval koche kodashim vekodashim kalim emala. If you only told me the first case of where you have sacrificial food and holin, I might have thought holin is of a different type of altogether. It's like min besheno mino, and it's easier to nullify something when it's two different things. Min besheno mino. So holin. That holin, if you have a lot of holin, it can nullify kodashim when the kodashim has no taste because it's of a different type. But if you have koche kodashim and kodashim kalim, those are two subcategories within the same type. They're both kodashim. And so it's kind of more like min bemino. And it's more difficult to nullify something if it's with its own type. And so I might have thought that koche kodashim, even the tiniest bit that doesn't give taste, still would make the whole thing stringency, the whole mixture of koche kodashim and kodashim kalim stringent. And so therefore, I need the case of koche kodashim and kodashim kalim to teach me that even kodashim kalim can nullify koche kodashim. So what if I had just that case? V'tana koche kodashim v'kodashim kalim havamina kodashim hu de'alimeh lebatule kodashim aval chulin emala siricha. I might have thought the other way around, that sacrificial food is strong enough that it can nullify other sacrificial food, so that the majority of kodashim kalim, although it's kalim, still it's holy, can nullify the little bit of koche kodashim that doesn't give taste. But I might have thought that holin is not as powerful, and even if I have a lot of holin and no taste of the kodesh, maybe the holin is not powerful enough to nullify it, and therefore I have that case also to teach me that indeed even holin can nullify kodesh, and so that's why I need both cases. Rakik, shahya berakik vechule. Now we learned that a wafer, it's unfit, reaches another one that is fit. So, or two pieces of meat, that one is fit and unfit, then it makes it nullified, but only a sliver of it. Tenoda banan, kol ashiriga, yachol afilu shelo bala, tamud lomar bibsara. So again, the pasuk says, kol ashiriga bibsara yikdash. So, the Baita teaches, everything it touches, does that mean does that mean, what if it touched but did not absorb anything, any taste? Would it still be prohibited? That's why it says tamadama bibsara, in his flesh. So in his flesh means the flesh, the flavor of the meat. Of a sin offering went into the other offering, yes, it will make it prohibited. Ad shibla bibsara, only if it absorbs into the other korban. Yachol naga b'miksat chaticha yeh kulo pasul, tamodomad yiga hanogeya pasul. You might think that even if one touches a little bit of the other, then the entire thing becomes pasul. That's why it says yiga, where it touches, only the place where it touches. So how do you combine these two words together? Ha-kesad, chotechet makom shebala. So what you have to do is cut off the place that it touches. Bib sara velob, and furthermore, the part, in other words, the part that absorbs will become prohibited, but not the whole thing. So when you combine them together, it just means you have to cut off the area where the invalid touched the valid one. You cut off from the valid one that part, and that part becomes the same law as the invalid, but the rest of it is okay. Bibsara v'lo begidin v'lo b'samot v'lo b'karnayim v'lo b'telafayim. When it says bibsara, the flesh, so that means not the gidim, not the sinews, and not the bones, and not the horns, and not the hooves. If any of those parts of the invalid chatat touches something else, then it will not transfer the prohibition, only if the flesh of the invalid touches the other item. Yikdash liot kamoha. Yikdash, it becomes holy, means it gets the same status as the invalid one. Hakesad, im pesulahi tipasel, vim kesharahi teachel kehamor sheba. If it's invalid, that touches a valid one, then that sliver of the valid one becomes invalid. Or if it's a kosher korban and it touches some other piece of meat, then that other piece of meat has to be eaten according to the stringencies of the sacrifice. Amai, v'nete aseh v'lidche et lo ta'aseh. Why should that be? Why shouldn't we say that a misvat aseh? There's a misvat aseh to eat sacrificial meat. So we have valid sacrificial meat. There's a mitzvah to eat it. And now you have this other invalid one. There's a lo ta'aseh against eating that one. Fine. But now that invalid one touched the valid one. So that sliver has two laws on it. One, a mitzvah ta'aseh, you have to eat it. And the other, because it's sacrifice, the other, a lo ta'aseh, it has a flavor of invalid meat in it. But the general rule is an aseh overrides a lo ta'aseh. So the mitzvah of eating the sacrificial meat should override. Amar Rava, en aseh doche et lo ta'aseh sheba mikdash. Rava says, although that rule is a general rule outside the mikdash, but in the mikdash, when it comes to sacrifices, that rule does not apply. How do you know? Shene'emar, ve'ayasem lo tishberu bo. For Korban Pesach, there's a mitzvah to eat the Korban Pesach, all of it. But there's also another law, that's an aseh. There's another lo ta'aseh that says, don't break the bones. Even if there's marrow that's edible in the bones, you can't break it. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer, Echad asem sheyesh bo moach ve'echad asem she'en bo moach. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya says the prohibition of breaking a bone applies both to a bone that has marrow in it or a skinny bone that has no marrow in it. Doesn't matter. Amai, why? Why don't we say the rule that a mitzvah aseh of eating a korban pesach overrides the lo ta'aseh of not breaking the bone? So we see that the rule of a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment does not apply to korbanot. Rav Ashi amar yikdash asehu ve'en aseh doche lo ta'aseh va'aseh. Rav Ashi has a different answer. He says the word yikdash will become holy is actually a positive word, and that itself is an aseh. And so now what you have here is an aseh to eat the korban, the kosher, the one that was valid. You have the mitzvah aseh to eat it. That's true. But now an invalid one touched it. And so now you have a lo ta'aseh, which is the taste of the invalid korban. There's a lo ta'aseh of eating that, including the sliver of the thing that it touched. And you have a mitzvah aseh from this pasuk that says yikdash. And when you have an aseh versus a combination, lo ta'aseh and an aseh, certainly the combo, lo ta'aseh and aseh, will override the aseh. Therefore, even if you say that in general, aseh doche lo ta'aseh, and even if you apply that rule even in the mikdash, that an aseh is doche lo ta'aseh, in this case it wouldn't matter, because an aseh of eating the korban is not going to override a combination lo ta'aseh and an aseh. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.